Okay, we are in the last book of our Old Testament study. Yeah. This is the end of the Old Testament narration, the Old Testament story as far as we can in the Bible. There are some other historical books that are outside of the Bible that we can use to figure out what happened going into the time of Jesus, but this is as far as the Bible goes. And this is the book of Nehemiah. It's on page 750 in your little black Bibles. Nehemiah lives in Susa, in the capital of Persia. This is about 14 years after Ezra's time. Ezra's still living in Jerusalem. He's still around. But the focus goes from Ezra, the scribe, to Nehemiah, who is back in Babylon. He's back in the king's capital. And he's a cupbearer. He's the one that pours the drinks for the king. He also tests the wine and the drink. He gets to drink it first. Because if someone tries to poison the king, he's the one that gets to die first. So he pours it, he drinks it. If he doesn't die, then the king knows it's okay for him to drink. So he's the cupbearer. He's the one that brings the king. It's a very important position. It takes a lot of class. He's in the company of royalty all the time. He has to be trusted by the king. Nehemiah was not a lowly individual. He was a slave in the sense that he was a Hebrew, he was a Jew, living in captivity, living in Persia, but he had a very respected high-level position. Okay? So he's living in Babylon, and he gets word back from his brother. And his brother's name is Hanani. And his brother comes back and gives him word that Jerusalem's walls are in rubble, just ruined. That the gates are all burned, the rocks are burned, they are all torn down. And it pricks his heart. It bothers him that this is true. And that would be in the first couple verses of chapter 1 of Nehemiah. What I want to do is I want to get, since I'm having problems with Nehemiah, I want to be honest with you. I want to put it out there for you. I want to put it in your lap. And we'll let this be part of your study. And the people at home, that are watching on video, this is your study. If you find the answer, then write it and send it back to me. And we're going to try to discuss it. What I want to do is I want to go through the first 7 chapters. And I'm just going to highlight it. We're going to go through it, touch on the bases, and you'll get a feel for what's going on at this time. What is God doing? And that's my question to you. Up until this point, we have seen God's plan, God's story working pretty steadily. We have been able to identify it quite easily so far. We know He's working towards bringing Jesus into the world. To bring the Redeemer here, the King here. And that eventually He's going to bring Christ back again as the King of Kings and over all things. And we're going to have that glory. We're going to be brought up in glory with Him. That we know that's the story. But Nehemiah, I have problems with Nehemiah and the story of Nehemiah, trying to figure out what is God doing here? How does it fit into the story? And I have a couple ideas, I have a couple theories, and I'll throw those out at the end. But I would like you, as we're going through this, to think about how is this important to the story of God's redemptive plan? Why is this happening? Okay? Does that make sense? You understand where I'm going? I understand Daniel, I understand the captivity. That's part of God's plan. I understand coming out of Egypt. We got that part. But Nehemiah, and he's going back now. He's going to go back and he's going to rebuild the walls around Jerusalem. Okay? And it's a little bit, there's a heaviness, I think, a little bit, or a little sketchiness to this. So let's just start. Chapter 1. Chapter 1 in verses 1 through 3, we get introduced to Nehemiah, and we get introduced to Hanani. And Hanani comes back and says that in verse 3, he says, "They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. And when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." That's how we are introduced to the story of Nehemiah. He mourns and he prays. And here's his prayer, starting in verse 5. "Then I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king." So he prays for God. He prays to God. How often?
Day and night.
Day and night. For how long?
20.
20? No.
50.
It's in verse 4. For some days. This is multiple days. Days and nights. He's praying day and night, fasting involved with that as well. And he says, I admit the sins of our fathers. I know that that's why we're out here in captivity. But you promised, look at that promise in verse 9. Or starting in verse 8. He says, this is from Moses. If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. Question: has that happened?
No.
Has God fulfilled that second half?
I wouldn't think so. I don't remember anything about it.
Well, we have the first, remember we had the first exiles. They came back under Zerubbabel several years before, even before Esther. Then we had the Esther period that we spent time thinking about, and then we had Ezra, and Ezra brought more people back.
Ezra.
Not Ezra, just Ezra.
Oh, yeah.
And now we have Nehemiah. Nehemiah hasn't returned yet, but it sounds to me like he's claiming an old promise. Didn't God tell Moses that even though if you disregard me, if you push me away, if you disobey, I'll scatter you. There's your captivity, right? But if you return to me and obey me, I will gather you, no matter how far away you are, I'll gather you and bring you back to the place that I will call my name. So my question is, and this is, I suppose this is where my comes from in Nehemiah, is Nehemiah's praying this prayer. It's not the first time we've heard it. And yet we don't have all the Jews coming back. Nehemiah is case in point. He's not coming back. In fact, he only comes back for a while, and then he goes back to the king. And then after he spends a little while there, he comes back again for a little while. And then it's the end of the Old Testament. Where's this great gathering of God's people and bringing them back to the land of promise? Do you see that? Is that historically up to this point? Have we seen that yet? I don't think so. But I ask you, I said, think about it for a little bit. What is happening? What is God doing? If God is not bringing all of the people back at this time, when does he bring them all back? When does he gather people from the farthest horizons of the world and bring them back into a place of where he called it by his name? That's a question mark for me.
Maybe when he sits back on the throne.
Maybe when he sits back on the throne, right? So he prays for success. Lord, give me success in front of this man. Who's the man? The king. Very good. He's going to go talk with the king. He's asking for God to intervene. Okay? Chapter 2. Chapter 2, in verses 1 through the first two verses, the king notices that Nehemiah is sad. And if you look at it, he says, starting in chapter 2, verse 1, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid. Why? Why would Nehemiah be afraid that the king noticed his sadness?
Because the king is not Jew, he will not understand why he is sad. Because of Jews, of his people, and the relationship with God.
So it's because because the king was not a Jew and wouldn't understand?
Well, Nehemiah, I don't know how, maybe he knew this because he allows then Nehemiah to go, and so the relationship probably between Nehemiah and Artaxerxes is good.
It seems good, but there's a reason why he's afraid. And the reason is because in the Persian Empire, the king was not allowed to see sadness. He was not allowed to see anything depressing, anything morbid, anything bad. His whole world was filled with contentment, comfort, pleasure, joy. That was okay. That could be in the king's presence. But don't bring your problems, your issues into the king's presence. He is too up there, too majestic, too wonderful to be bothered by your issues. Your bad mood. It would be similar to a job. You don't, if you're a waitress or a waiter, you don't bring your problems to the table you don't walk up to something. Hi, what do you want? I'm sorry, what? Sorry, hold on. What? I'm sorry, I'm just having a really bad day. Okay, I'm so sorry. Wait a minute. No, you don't do that. You don't bring your problems to your workplace. So the cupbearer would not bring, the people in the king's company wouldn't bring their issues in front of the king. That would be bad. All right. So he's afraid. He's afraid that something might happen. So in verse 3, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven and I answered the king. Now I want to stop right there. What does Nehemiah do?
He's praying first to God.
So, yeah, and we're not talking about, hold on there, king. Hold on a minute. I gotta do this. Get on his knees and pray for 25 minutes and really get into it. And he has to really convince God to help him out. And then he can go back and he can, no. King says, why? What do you want? And so he quickly prays, Lord, give me the words. Help me out. Give me the words. And so he answers. This is something that I do notice about Nehemiah, no matter where he is in the whole thing. Prayer always begins in action. Nehemiah starts this. Remember, what was it that was the catalyst that caused him to want to go back, want to do something about Jerusalem? What was it that sparked that? In chapter 1.
When he heard
No
these
walls.
things, that there is the Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire.
Right. So he got the news, and the first thing he does is it hurts him, and he prays. Before he goes talking to the king, before he puts any plan into action, he doesn't put a plan in action and then pray, Lord, please go over and bless it. Although in our modern day era, that's how we usually will do things. We'll go start something and say, oh, that's right, we were supposed to pray, weren't we? All right, let's all get together and let's pray about this. Lord, we really pray that you would bless this. Nehemiah knew where to start. The start was, Lord, you're my source, you're my strength. I'm going to start there. And so he prays and begins there. And so he prays again, and then he answers the king. And in verse 5 he says, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city of Judah, or the city in Judah, where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked him, how long will your journey take, and when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. All right. So what's going on? What does he make? What is his request?
That it be sent to rebuild the city.
Yes. Let me go. Let my responsibilities as your cupbearer. Let it go, and I will go. Let me go rebuild my city, the walls. Now, understand what is at stake here for the king. This is his trusted guy that saves his life, that protects him from being poisoned. And yet the king says, how much time? Now, when I read that the first time, I'm thinking, okay, maybe a couple months, whatever. No, we're talking years. Years. As a matter of fact, if I remember right, it was 27 years. No, excuse me, 12 years. 12 years. So he's going to go away for 12 years, and then he's going to come back. So that's what he requests. And so, but he doesn't stop there. He keeps going. Verse 7, he asks for not only the authority to build the walls, but letters of safe conduct. He asks for authorization and access to the king's forests. Look in verse down just before or at the end of verse 8. And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted my request. So he even gives God the glory. He gives God the acknowledgement that it was by God's gracious hand. Sounds like Ezra, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he goes in verses 9. He says, so I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. So not only does the king give him permission to go back rebuild the walls, letters of authorization to build the walls to all the governors in the region, the time off from his regular duties, 12 years, to go and do this, but he also, and authorization to be given the king's lumber to rebuild. But he also sends an army with Nehemiah and a cavalry. Cavalry, excuse me, thank you, not cavalry. Wrong space, wrong time. So not bad. And he says this is all because of the gracious hand of God. But we got problems. What happens in verse 10? Somebody read verse 10.
When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite officials heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites.
Yes. What does that sound like?
Jealousy?
Jealousy, What do you think you're going to do? Do you think opposition? Yes.
The enemy?
Did you read my notes?
No, I don't have, I was trying to think of maybe a better.
Yes. Just to give you a little background, Sanballat is the governor of Samaria. He's probably a Moabite. Now, if you're looking at Jerusalem, this is the coast. Here's the lake or Galilee. Here's the Jordan River. Here's the Dead Sea. Jerusalem is like right here. Samaria is like all of this. That's Sanballat.
It is?
That's his territory. He's the head honcho of that. It would be, remember when Israel was split and you had Israel in the north, Judah in the south? Israel in the north, that's basically where Sanballat ruled. And he was the governor. Tobiah was the governor of Ammon. So here's Sanballat.
Doesn't that sound delay?
That was a band in the 80s, I think. This is Tobiah. Okay?
Isn't that Tobiah?
And then you're going to hear about another one. His name is Geshem. And Geshem is an Arab. And Geshem is down here. So here's Nehemiah.
Make that darker circle, okay? Around Nehemiah instead of dots, so we can see better. There you go.
I mean, that's where he's going.
That's Judah. That's his area of control. He's been given authority by the king and an army to go back and build Jerusalem, rebuild the walls. He's going to be the governor of Judah for this time frame. Mind you, there's been no governor there. Nobody's lived there. It's just Ezra and a couple of people, stragglers basically. And Ezra and his bunch have been trying to get this wall built, and it keeps being torn down, and he built and torn down, and built and torn down, and built and torn down. There's been a lot of opposition over the years. Nehemiah hears about this. He's very upset. He wants to go back and do it. So I just want to give you an idea of who Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem are. Okay? So in verses 11 through 16 of chapter 2, and we won't read that, but I'll let you go through it in your own personal studies. Nehemiah he's gone back, and he's going to spend a couple days quietly, secretly surveying the wall and the damage. He's on a mount of some sort, camel or whatever, and he's going to walk around by night. He's going to look at the wall. The wall with the temple here, so to speak. That's a bad temple, but here's the temple. And this is the wall. It goes all the way around. And there's a valley on this side, the Kidron Valley. There's a valley here, and then there's a valley over here. But that wall, that place where Jerusalem is at, is on the edge of like a finger, like a cliff. If you it would look like this. And the temple's at the top. And then the houses were along here, and then you had a wall that went around and around the backside. So it was like this, and Jerusalem is on the top, temple's on the very top of this finger, and there was a wall that went around it. And it was very easy to get into, very easy to attack, and there was no defense for it. And Nehemiah wanted to put a wall, put up some defenses. So he starts and he makes his tour, and he goes all the way around to survey the wall. After he surveys the wall, we have more problems with Sanballat in verses 19. Who could read 19 and 20 for me?
I might be
But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. "What is this you are doing?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" I answered them by saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding, but as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it."
Okay. So, verses 11 through 16, he's doing his survey. And then he shares it in between those two sections, the one that Mom read and the one that he goes and surveys. So he shares this. He says, I have a vision. Oh, people of Judah, or Jerusalem, let's rebuild the wall. They all go, yeah, let's do that. Great idea. They like it. Sanballat and his buddies who are living around here, they don't like that idea at all. So they start ridiculing him. Oh, what are you going to do? You're going to build that little rinky-dink place again? And start ridiculing him. That's the first stage of their opposition. And how does Nehemiah answer them? What's his response?
God of heaven.
The God of heaven will give us success. Period. End of discussion. No more. Who does that sound like? Does that sound like anybody else in the Old Testament?
Yeah.
Who?
Job.
Job? Just a little bit. I'm thinking of somebody a little bit before Nehemiah. Another king, but he wasn't a king yet.
Lucifer.
David. David standing before whom?
That's what I was gonna say.
Huh?
Answer.
Goliath. Remember Goliath said, "Who are you? You're a dog. Why would you send me this dog to fight me?" And David says, "Today the God of our forefathers of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he will hand you to me. He will make you the food for the birds and the dogs." He gives credit. He says, God will be our success. And Nehemiah says basically the same thing. He points to God and says, God's going to do it. And that's the end of chapter 2. All right? So we've had a little bit of opposition. We have the idea that the work is going to begin, what they're going to do. And so in chapter 3 is very interesting. Chapter 3, the walls are beginning to be built. Nehemiah is now going to organize. And if you read through this, you'll get the sheep gate, the fish gate, you'll get the Jehoshan gate, you'll get all these different gates. These are little breaks around the city where there's little spots. These would be the front doors, I guess you could call them. These are the doors of the wall where you could come in. And normally there's a big door. It's a gate that you could lock at night. And then there's walls in between the gates, right? Well, I'm not going to go through all of these people because it's just name after name, and this person did this, 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 and you do that for 32 verses. All of chapter 3 is doing that. But here's what I would like you to notice. What I would like you to notice is the phrase next to. If you look in verse 2, the men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zakur, son of Imri, built next to them. Go on to a little bit further. The next section, the middle of verse 4, next to him, Mishulam, son of Barakiah, son of Mishazabel, made repairs, and next to him, Zadok, son of, on and on and on. You go through verse 7, next to them. Go to verse 8, the next section, next to that. Go down to verse 9, the next section, verse 10, next to him. On and on and on. 26 times. That phrase, or beside him, is mentioned in the building of the wall. So here's what goes on. There is a family up here that gets assigned to build this section of the wall. And next to them is another family, and they build the next section of wall. And next to them is another family, and they build the next section, and next to them, and next to them, and next to them. What are we talking about? What is this giving you a picture of?
Teamwork.
Teamwork. Community. Community. How much community do we have in our churches and ministries today? How much next to Him do we have? How much you do your thing and it's good? How much do I come next to Him and aid Him? I got your left side. You got my right side. And we'll do that.
We do programs.
Do we do this? Do we do that next to Him? Do we build that sense of community in our families and in our... I think more often we do it in families. You know, we help one another. We come along. We support one another in families. But when it comes to the church, it's more business. And we tend to departmentalize. You do your thing and you do your thing. And there's not much, well, how does my thing help your thing? Does mine come, do I come next to you? Do I lift you up? How about that one? How about just in discipleship in you're feeling down? You just need to be lifted up. Do I come next to you? Do I lift you up? I got your back. I'm with you. We'll do this together. This is whatever this task is, we're together. I'll be next to you. And do you know what? And she'll be next to you on your other side. And you know what? Before that, she'll be next to you on the other side. There seems to me to be a bit of a lesson here on how to get something done. This is what community is supposed to be, I think. This is one of the things that I see. To me, that's the biggest message of chapter 3 is that community. They came together and worked to a common goal. And where one could not, the other one would lift up. It was this, I'm going to help you. Because if your wall gets built but mine does not, there's a hole in the wall and your family's at risk. Do you get that? If I don't back you up and you fall, there's a hole. There's a hole in our family. If you have a community, and we call them churches. Church is a community of families. And if one family falters, one family falls, one family is attacked, one family can't get up, can't make it, then the family, the community of families is at risk. You know the old saying, the chain is only as strong as the weakest link?
Right.
Very much in the same boat. If you have a church that has a bunch of broken families, and you don't have enough people coming alongside, then you're going to have a broken community. You can't have unity. You can't have success there. That's not going to happen. We need to lift one another up. And that's what I get out of chapter 3. But as we move into chapter 4, we see that our good friend Sanballat isn't going to sit back and just let the Jews build this wall. So in chapter 4, Sanballat and an army that he puts together sits outside Jerusalem and starts mocking them. So in verses 1 through 3, we have this of chapter 4. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria. He said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah, the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What they are building, if even a fox climbed on it, he would break down their walls of stone." So here's the next little bit. Now you got the Samaritan army and Tobiah and his little bunch, and they're sitting outside the wall, outside the area, throwing jokes and ridiculing and mocking and putting down. It'll never last. What are you going to do? Take all those broken, burned stones and make a real wall out of that? Ha! Interesting. This is going to come to play in a few verses and see how it has an effect on the Jews that are building the wall. Yes, ma'am?
I think something's gonna happen to the bad people that are saying that from God.
You think that maybe something would happen to the bad people. God would step in and smash them, huh?
You know what?
I don't know that that's going to happen, though. Can we read what God's going to do?
I think the wall's coming down and fall down.
Not Jericho.
Different wall.
Didn't he have a letter from the king?
Yes, he had a letter from the
They
king.
ignored what the king said.
Yes, they were ignoring what the king had to say. What does Nehemiah do? How does Nehemiah react to this?
Praise.
He prays, yes, verses 4 and 5. Who wants to read it?
I'll do it.
Go ahead.
Hear us, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults upon their own heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders.
That's right. So verse 6, so we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all of their heart. So he prays and says, Lord, turn it back on them. Get them. Don't let their ridiculing and their threats and their intimidation get us. And they kept building. Now the wall's half built. It's half as high as it should be. It needs to go twice as high now. In verse 7, but when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs and the Ammonites and the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. Wow. Now they've gotten this little ally outside the walls and they're threatening to come fight. They got this plot. They've made this plan. What does Nehemiah do? Verse 9.
Pray.
Read it. What does it say?
But we pray to our God and posted guards day and night to meet these threats.
Yes. So every time the enemies try to do something, Nehemiah responds with, we prayed. We pray. I prayed. God will take care of it. He's pointing it back to God. He's putting it in God's hands. He's saying, God, you do this. This is your battle. This is your fight. Well, it started to get to the people. Look at how they answer. Look at what happens in verse 10. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot build the wall.
They're getting weak.
Getting discouraged.
They're getting discouraged, right? Where did they get this business about rubble? There is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. What happened to back in chapter 2? They thought it was a great idea.
From those guys, because they said, what are you going to do with all this rubble?
Yes. So what's happening?
They're like brainwashing them.
Yeah, it's starting to get to the Jews. The Jews are starting to believe the ridicule and the mocking that's coming from the people outside. You're going to pick up a bunch of burnt stones and try to build a wall? Oh, come on. What a waste of time. Even a fox climbing on it would break it down. And they're starting to believe it. Oh, our strength is going. We can't do it. This rubble, there's just too much burnt stone, burnt garbage, and all this lying around. So it doesn't end there. Verse 11, also our enemies said, before they know it and see us, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to their work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Wow, this is getting pretty intense. What do you think Nehemiah does?
Praise.
What does verse 13 say? Actually, verse 13, through 15. Who wants to read 13 through 15?
Therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest point of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to our own work.
Bingo. So, explain that to me. Nehemiah is starting to get, or the people are starting to get beat up mentally. They're starting to get psyched out. They've been told that we're going to get you. We're going to sneak in when you ain't looking, no matter where you turn, we're going to get you and we're going to kill you. And they're starting to believe this. What does Nehemiah say?
Remember God.
Remember the Lord. Right?
Gives them a pep talk.
Yes, but what's the pep talk? Oh, come on, guys, we can do this. We got it. We made half of it already. We can do the other half.
He said, remember God, because even when we can't do it, God can.
Yes. What was the description of the Lord? Remember the Lord. Which Lord?
Great and awesome.
The great and awesome. I really like that. I really, really like that. Do you know why? Because an awe of God overcomes anything. There is no fight, no fear, no threat, no trouble that doesn't seem small compared to the awesomeness of God. And he tells them, remember how awesome your God is. How great he is. Remember who he is. Remember what he has done. Do you not know how awesome your God is? And I think that at times we forget. We don't spend enough time thinking about how awesome God is. We get so bogged down looking at the problems that we have in our lives, the things that we just can't seem to get rid of, and we get lost in that. We get burdened and heavy and just down, and we forget. Do you know what? God spoke, and all of this came into being. God, by his power and will, holds everything together. So it doesn't just go and completely stop from existing. He maintains it. God's sovereign power moves in everybody's life, little bit by little bit, but in every single aspect of it. He is there, moving, changing, modifying, bringing things together, bringing things apart, keeping things apart, fixing things. And so Nehemiah says, remember this Lord who is great and awesome. And I think we need to do that sometime. Well, the enemy responds in verse 15 as Tracy read. And as Larry read, and they hear about what Nehemiah has done, that they understand the plot, and they go, and they just leave. And so in verse 16 through 23, Nehemiah sets up more strategy. He puts up shifts. He says, while you're building a wall, part of you build, the other part hold swords and watch and work alternating shifts. He established an early warning system because they were all spread out. Remember, this is a long area around here. So they have a family over here. If the armies started to come and attack this way, how would the people down here know that was going on and they would need to come get help? So Nehemiah says, well, we'll put trumpets around. And if anybody sees or has trouble, blow the trumpet and everybody will come rushing up and help. So he has this early warning system that he puts in place. He also reminds everybody that our God will fight for us. And if you turn the page and look in verse 20, he says, wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. That was the early warning sign. Our God will fight for us. It's God's fight. He'll do the fighting for us. So work continued, on guard, alert, ready. That sounds very familiar. That sounds like something Paul said. Be ready, in season and out. Guard the truth. Preach. Teach. Hold fast. Those are all military terms. So we have that with Nehemiah. Nehemiah says, be ready, be on guard. We got to complete this work. And I think we need to do the same thing. Chapter 5, we got problems on the inside. It wasn't bad enough that Sanballat and his crew is on the outside causing problems. We got problems on the inside. Who knows what usury? Is it usury? Did I pronounce that correctly? Usury? What is usury? Do you know what that is? That's loaning money at high interest. It was against the Mosaic law. You could not do that. But rich Jews in this time were doing that. They were lending money to the poorer Jews who didn't have enough money to pay their taxes and to pay the local authorities, particularly Mr. Tobiah over here, who had this section. So what they would do is the poor people got into so much debt that they actually had to send their children to go work it off. So you have rich Jews who put a financial burden on people that was against God's law. They got into debt, so much debt, that those families had to send their children over to Mr. Tobias so that they could be slaves and work it off. They were debtors' slaves. Have you ever heard that term? Debtors. The United States was built off of a lot of debtors.
Indentured servants.
Indentured servants, yes, that type of thing. They had to work for so much time to pay off their loan. Well, Nehemiah says, you are doing what? Starting in verse 6 of chapter 5. When I heard their outcry, that's the poor people, and their charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you are exacting usury from your own countrymen. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, as far as possible, we have bought back our Jewish brothers who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your brothers only for them to be sold back to us? They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. So I continued, what you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending people money and grain. But let the exacting of usury stop. Give back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, and also the usury you are charging them, the 100th part of the money, grain, new wine, and oil. Give it back. Give it back. Give them back their land. Give them back their groves. Give them back their crops. Give it back. Stop doing it. Okay? Not too hard. Was there anything that you read in chapter 5 that struck you as being odd? Or that you had any questions about in chapter 5? No.
No, the priests were also among the nobles.
Yes, the priests were among the nobles, but the priests were also called at the end to take an oath. Make them swear. So no more usury. In the last part, verses 14 through the end, it talks about Nehemiah, that he was there for 12 years before he returned to Jerusalem. And then chapter 6, Sanballat gets up to more of his old stuff. Starting in verse 1. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me, so I sent messengers to them with this reply. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. So now what are they trying to do? Yeah, they're trying to lure him out. Come out of the city so we can go over and kill you. He's no dummy. He says, no, work's too busy, can't come, so sorry, bye. Right? But he's not finished. Sanballat's not finished. What happens in the next one? Someone read verse 5.
Then the 5th time Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written, It is reported among the nations that Geshem says it is true that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now, this report will get back to the king, so come, let us confer together.
Okay. Now this is a bit interesting. You got to understand what's happened. Sanballat is wicked.
He's manipulating, and he's basically going to tell a big
What is he?
lie.
Yeah, he's going to tell a big old lie. What is the lie?
That they're going to promote him to king.
Yeah, if you don't come here, we're gonna go tell the king that you're gonna revolt against him.
Okay.
Which would likely be believed.
That's when you read it the first time, that's what you get. That Sanballat's threatening Nehemiah, saying, Nehemiah, we got this here letter, and Geshem, the Arab, says it's true, these rumors are true, that you have decided to be the king, you've rebuilt the walls, and you've appointed yourself king, and you have prophets who are going to proclaim that there's a new king in Judah.
He's trying to ruin his reputation.
Exactly. But here's the important underline, that if you don't get it. How did the message come?
A messenger in an unsealed envelope.
Okay. Here is an unsealed envelope. Now that is important. Because the messenger would have come probably by donkey, horse, camel, something, and will have traveled many miles. It's unsealed. What do you think is going to happen to the letter?
It's going to be read.
Huh?
It's going to be read.
Of course it is. It's going to be read all the way down from wherever it started, all the way down to Nehemiah. That's why it was left unsealed, so that it could be read. By the time the messenger got to Nehemiah with the letter, Nehemiah knows it's been read by many, many, many people. Chances are Sanballat has started this rumor. It's a rumor mill. He has started a little fire, and he's hoping that the fire turns into a forest fire, out of control, and that the fire gets all the way back to the king, and the king gets message, wow, that Nehemiah guy, he's out of control.
Well, not only that, I think he wants it to get back to all the people in Jerusalem. More importantly, I think.
I don't know if it's more important because the people in Jerusalem probably wouldn't mind that they got a new king.
Well, okay, yes and no. I think his plan to say that he could get it to the king didn't need to go through that. He could have just reported it to the king. I think he was trying to start a rumor so that people in Israel started to doubt, because obviously if that was the intent Nehemiah had, he would have told his people, Now they're going to be sitting back going, well, this is the first we've ever heard of it. Who appointed Nehemiah our king? And so I think he's trying to start
That's true. That's true.
Their own little revolt inside the whole.
So there's a little mutiny
Yes.
inside the walls. Yeah, sure, why not? I could see that. I could see that happening too. Yes. So it's very interesting. This whole thing comes about. He is one sneaky bad guy. Okay? Verse 8, I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will be too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. What does Nehemiah do again? Prays again. Lord, strengthen my hands. But I hear what you're saying. Perhaps based on what he's saying, that their hands would be too weak. He says that was their hope, that their hands would be too weak. That the people inside would know that if the king got wind that Nehemiah was trying to be king, that the king would come over and slaughter them all again. And so they're not only nervous for who this Nehemiah guy thinks he might be, but that it might get back to the king and the king will come back and slaughter them and knock them all out. So perhaps that's a reason why their hands became weak. So, man, Sanballat's just beaten and beaten and beaten and beaten. And Nehemiah keeps coming back with, that's not true. Lord, strengthen my hand. That's not true. Don't be afraid. Remember the Lord. He is great. He is awesome. But Sanballat has one more little thing he's going to pull out of his sleeve. And that's the last part. One day, this is in verse 10. One day I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, who was shut in at his home. He said, let us meet in the house of God, inside the temple, and let us close the temple doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night they are coming to kill you. But I said, should a man like me run away? Or should one like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. Don't read farther. What's going on here? This Shemaiah, he's inside the gates. He's inside the walls. He's one of the Jews.
He was what?
I think he's being used.
You think he's being used?
He's a double agent.
He's a double agent, yes. Sanballat got a hold of someone inside, paid him off to say, Nehemiah, go, someone's going to get you. They're going to assassinate you. Go inside the temple and lock yourself in the temple. What's wrong with that?
Makes him look like a coward.
Besides making him look like a coward. Is Nehemiah a priest?
No, he wasn't supposed to go in the temple.
Could he go inside and lock himself in there?
No.
He would have to break God's law. So, your life's in danger, Nehemiah. Go inside the temple and lock yourself in the temple. What would the people do if he did that? What would be how much credibility would he have with the people?
They will not trust him anymore.
No, he would lose all of his reputation. He would be, you have broken the most holy, sacred place that we have out of fear. What happened to remember the Lord? What happened to God will fight our fight for us? What happened to all that, Nehemiah? How come you're running and breaking God's law now?
And also it tells me that Nehemiah was a very righteous man, and his testimony was not smeared from anybody, even from those who claim to be God's people.
He stayed right.
He stayed right.
That's right. In the threat of this is interesting you mentioned that, because I hadn't thought about that. But in the work, in the project, he had opposition. Mm-hmm. And there were many times when he could have taken an easy out. He could have done something on his own. He could have done something that was a little bit of a compromise, and yet he didn't. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if we don't do that too often in our own work for the Lord. We do something for the Lord, but because we're going to get smeared, somebody on the outside's not going to like it, or they're not going to receive it as well. So let's change it. Let's compromise just a little bit to make it more palatable for the people on the outside. That's Nehemiah didn't do that.
Yeah, say aloud your opinion about this scripture, because you can stir something in the church. Let's just pretend that you don't say it so loud so we don't hear it.
No. I'm thinking Easter eggs.
Okay, that's...
Easter eggs to reach people who are lost. I mean, come on. Verse 12. Well, here's where we find out that Nehemiah knew what was going on. Verse 12 says, I realized that God had not sent him, but that he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this, and then they would give me a bad name to discredit me. So it's both to discredit him by causing him to sin by going into a holy place where he is not allowed to, and as a result, discredit him in front of his people. And so he prays again. Verse 14, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, O my God, because of what they have done. Remember also the prophetess Neodiah and the rest of the prophets who have been trying to intimidate me. Obviously, it wasn't just this one guy. There was a whole bunch of people that they tried to get. Verse 15, so the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God.
Wow.
If they finished that in 52 days, how did he get to stay there for 12 years?
Because he was the governor. He was basically the same position as Sanballat or Tobiah. Sanballat was the governor because the king had appointed him to be king. Tobiah was the governor because the king had appointed him to be the governor. Not the king, but to be governor. These were all positions that the king had to appoint. Nehemiah then became the governor of Judah. That area right there with Jerusalem as its center and as its capital.
Well, if Sanballat had that section, and Tobiah had that section, and Geshem had that section, who had that whole middle section to begin with?
It was empty. There was nothing there. It was just rubble. Ezra was in Jerusalem, but mostly, and you'll find that out in chapter 7, he gets to the place where the walls are done. Let's see if I can find it. Look in chapter 7, verse 4. And this is where we'll stop. We'll stop at this point. Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not yet been built. He has this huge wall. The temple's now surrounded. The gates are up. Everything is ready to go, but there's nobody living there. There's very few people. They're all scattered all over the place. Some are still enslaved to Tobiah, working it for him. Some are to other people. They're all over the place. There is no country yet. There is no Judah, so to speak. It's just this land, and primarily Jerusalem. This little hill. That's it. Everything else is just scattered. So, in chapter 7, you find out that what Nehemiah basically does is he wants to take a census. He wants to find out who's living around the area. And he goes back to the old records, when the first people came to Jerusalem under Zerubbabel, and he starts looking up family names. And then he, more than likely, it looks like what he does in chapter 7 is he recruits people to come live in the city. He goes, says, hey, you have family ancestry that came here in the first return, come live in the city. Your family name was on the list under Zerubbabel. You come live in the city. You build your house in the city. And so in chapter 7, the walls are built and Nehemiah is trying to repopulate it. And that's the end of chapter 7. Now you have Jerusalem, you have the walls, you have the gates. It's all put together. So what's left? What's left in our story of the Old Testament? And the king comes back and he sets up his throne in the temple and he becomes great and the Messiah returns, all that? No, we don't get that in the Old Testament. No, that doesn't happen. You have chapters 8 through 13, and that's the end of the Old Testament. Chapter 8 goes back to Ezra.
Yep, when we first started Nehemiah, I noticed from the very beginning of chapter 1 how in stark contrast Nehemiah was, or the whole book of Nehemiah was, to the book of Esther.
Oh, yes.
Nehemiah prayed about everything, before everything, and having that not in Esther really kind of makes you wonder back about what you were saying, and that is the hypothesis that they weren't, Esther and her brother weren't as, godly people as we
Originally thought, right. Yeah, that the idea that
Because it's just so
it is in a
different.
stark contrast to the book of
Everything
Esther.
else, everything
Right,
else.
right. Well, so was Ezra. The last part of Ezra was the same way. Where does it go? This is back to my question to you. The last part of the book of Nehemiah, Ezra's going to read the law. He's going to come out. He's going to gather all the people. They're going to read the law again. And they're going to have a little bit of cleaning house time, a little spiritual reformation. And that's it. End of the Old Testament. That's all that's left in Nehemiah.
Are you saying that's the end of the writing of the Old Testament? Are you speaking about the writing, the prophets? Or are you saying that that's the end of an era or a period? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, I am perplexed. Like I said, the end of Nehemiah, the last part of Nehemiah, is nothing more than the spiritual little revival that they had at the end of Ezra. Same thing. And then it ends. Then the story of Israel ends, and you don't pick it up again until you get to Matthew with John the Baptist. Then the story, new era or a new something. Yeah. There's this, it's as if, have you ever gone, here's an analogy. You're watching a movie or you're reading a book and it's good. It is really good. And it gets you on the edge of your seat. It gets right there. You know what's going to happen. You know what's coming. And to be continued next week. And it's like, why? No, I knew you were going to do that. Not a two-parter, right? That's what I feel like when I get to the end of the Old Testament. Well, what happened to the king? What happened to the priest? What happened? I mean, there is so much in the Old Testament, so much promise, so much.
Happily ever after.
Where's the happily ever after? Where's God's victory, so to speak? I'm looking for God's victory. Where's the end of the promises? Where's the fulfillment of it all? Instead, you get to the end of Nehemiah's story, and you go, wow, that was a little flat. Where's the big dun da da at the end? We don't get that. In fact, we get, some of the same old stuff. Malachi, the last of the prophets,
because the story hasn't ended yet. You've been driving that home. I mean, the story's not done. Obviously, it is a 2 or 3-parter, like you just said. So we went from there to now the New Testament to the fulfilling of the promises. That's why it fell flat, because we're not done.
You're right.
It's not over.
It's not over. The story is not over. It's not God tried. He did the best he could. But boy, those Jews. Oh well, let's wait 400 years while God figures out another plan. Oh, let's send Jesus. Great idea. That plan will work. No. That is not what is going on. God has taken humanity to the absolute extent. Think of how many times. This is one of those things that, you keep saying, fellas, those Jews, they never learn. Go back even before the Jews. Go back before the Jews. Remember, the Jews don't show up until several thousand years. Wasn't it almost 2,000 years before Abram is called? Didn't Noah show up first? Weren't the people before that? Weren't there thousands? Didn't they leave thousands of years or almost 1,000 years each? Right? Remember all that time? Did they win? Did they get it? Did they go, ha, good, you got it. Thank you, you're in heaven. No. So it's not just a Jew thing.
You're right.
It's a human thing. God has taken the Old Testament from the creation, from the very beginning, a perfect man, a perfect woman, a perfect environment. Perfect paradise. And they blew it. They blew it. They only had to obey one rule. It wasn't this 20,600 list of laws. One rule. Perfect environment. And they blew it. And so throughout all of the Old Testament story, it is nothing, in my mind, that I see nothing but God showing man how he cannot do it. That man needs a mediator. Man needs somebody to stand between a righteous God and a fallen, mortal, sinful, willful, selfish, disobedient, incapable human. Somebody needs to be in between. Somebody has to bridge that gap. Sin has so destroyed humanity that there's nothing that God can give man. Here's a resource. Take it. Run for it. Try. Do it. Here's a law. Just try to obey the law. Do the law. No. Here's my covenant. I'll be your God. Nothing that God gives to man can man succeed with. He cannot do it unto of himself. He needs something outside. He needs rebirth. He needs a redeemer. He needs somebody who can step into that world. And that's what we get to. At the end of the story, the end of the narration, the end of the historical part of the Old Testament, we get to a place where man is fallen, man is incapable, he is depraved, he has no ability, he cannot lift himself up by his own righteousness, by his own goodness, he cannot walk into heaven, he cannot plead his case before God. He stands, as Ezra said, we looked at it last time, we stand before a righteous God and we have nothing to say. We need a redeemer. We need a better answer, a better solution. It's not going to be in us. We can't do it. We're not going to be given a magic ticket. And all of the Old Testament history proves that we cannot do it. We need a Savior. We need God Himself to be our sacrifice.